Thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day. I'm amazed to see you all here and very grateful. And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much to the organizers of the Walt Whitman series for inviting me. I'm honored to be in such company. I'm going to read 3 different scenes because I think it'll keep you awake, I think, more effectively than reading one long one. And I was thinking about what I wanted to read for the series, and I was thinking about character, first of all. So I'm glad you used that quote in your introduction, which was wonderful, by the way. Thank you. I'd forgotten I'd said that. I was listening thinking, yeah, that's right. I was thinking about character, and I was thinking about minor characters and how important they are in a novel and how seldomly they're talked about in a sort of, foremost way. And focused on. So I thought I would honor the minor character today by reading 3 scenes in which a minor character appears. And in the first scene, he appears again in the novel, but he is definitely a minor character, and intentionally so. And then in the next 2 scenes, in The Great Man and the Astral, he reappears again. And when I say that, I mean he's sort of the same character. And I was thinking about reading the scene from the Epicure's Lament that I'll begin with. And it occurred to me that this character was it was ringing a little bell when I was trying to think of what to read in later novels. And I realized, oh yeah, it's sort of a theme. And I won't say any more about it, except that he's sort of the voice of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas past. I don't like flashbacks, and I do everything I can to avoid writing them. And I feel like maybe this guy is a sort of a way of moving the narrative forward from the past into the future by forcing whatever character he's talking to, which is, various main characters in these 3 novels, to recognize something that he needs to recognize for the plot to go forward. So I'll begin with the Epicure's Lament, and this is a novel about a 40-year-old man named Hugo Whittier who is a hermit living in his family's ancestral mansion on the Hudson River, feeling that his life is over, and he's deliberately smoking himself to death. So he's suicidal, and in the scene that I'm going to read, he meets the hitman who failed to kill him 20 years earlier. The hitman was hired by his cousin, with whom Hugo was sleeping, because she found out that he was cheating on her and hired him to kill Hugo. He didn't kill Hugo. Hugo is alive because he's narrating the novel. But here's the hitman 20 years later in this small town on the Hudson River where Hugo is living. I was standing in line at the supermarket with my little arm basket of goodies when what to my wondering eyes should appear but Shlomo the hitman, carrying his own basket of goodies, which I couldn't help noticing consisted entirely of packaged, nitrate-heavy, artificially flavored dreck. He saw me, I saw him. Too late for either of us to backtrack, recognition was full-blown in my expression and had just begun to dawn in his squinty eyes. Shlomo, I said, placing my purchases on the conveyor belt with feigned relaxation. Amazing coincidence to see you again after all these years. Hold on, he said. Wait till I buy all this crap. I want to talk to you out in the parking lot. Yeah, I rejoined. I bet you do. We carried our single bachelor plastic sacks. Sorry about this, I have some allergy things going on. I'll try to read through it. We carried our single bachelor plastic sacks through the pneumatic door, out into the cold wind. I hunched into my coat, he did likewise. Why exactly am I not dead, I asked. Shut up, he said without heat. I don't give a fuck, I got out of the business and relocated. If anyone knows I'm here, I'll be the one who's dead. They didn't move me very fucking far away from all the trouble. Surprised you recognized me, I said, after all these decades. You're a million years older and uglier now, but you look like the same jerk-off you were back then. I wish I would have whacked you. Me too, I said. I'm serious. It would have been better for everyone, especially me, right now. Your secret, I said solemnly, is safe with me. If you want to whack me now, it's fine with me. Back then, I had reason to care. Now I don't. Let's go get a drink and talk it over. Let's go get a drink and not talk over a fucking thing, he said. I should warn you that the voice from Christmas past swears a lot. There was no heat behind his words. He seemed almost glad to see a familiar face. Judging by the contents of his grocery basket, There was no dumpy little missus cooking his supper at home, wherever that home may have been. I pictured a rented upstairs room, thank you, in an old row house in some depressed river town. He had that look we all get when we've gone too long without a woman, the pinched schlumpiness of the unfucked middle-aged man. I don't want to hear any grousing from you. You got away, be glad you're alive. The same way I'm glad I got away without concrete ankles. You and me, we were both caught in the same fucked up shit. Well, I said, but I was innocent. Sure you were, he said. Fucking around on my fat, pathetic cousin, dipping your little pecker where you shouldn't have. Those were the days, I sighed. I tried to have a poke at that Swede cupcake myself, Shlomo said with equal wistfulness. She shut me good. Why, I oughta, I said, without any heat myself. A matched pair of defanged old snakes, we went, as fate would have it, to Rex's, where the drooling retard of a bartender set us up with shots and beers, after scratching his head, puzzling out the logic of it all. 4 glasses, 2 customers. It didn't add up is what it didn't. But he managed to pull it all together while my new best pal, Shlomo, visibly cast about for topics that didn't include organized crime, witness protection, or the question of why I wasn't dead. So how long after you were supposed to kill me did you get out of the mob and into the witness protection program? I asked pleasantly as he took his first nip of whiskey. He coughed as I had intended him to do. Shut the fuck up, he said, with some of his old malevolence. Just wondering, I said with a chuckle. We settled in the way you do at a bar, our elbows rocking a little on the bar top to find the best angle for resting, our butts gently, gradually coming to a comfortable stop that balanced us on the butterfly wingtips of our pelvic bones. Neither of us has much of a rump, so this was a delicate, precise, but largely unconscious process. A hitman, I said musingly. What a thing to be. What do you do? He asked wearily. Not much, I said. Nothing at all. I find myself deeply engrossed in this and that, but not in any lucrative or sustained way. No job, he said, peering at me. No job, I said back. At least I had a calling, he said. But don't you feel them all flocking around you in the middle of the night, looking at you accusingly with their empty eye sockets? Who? I stared at him as if I were one of them, so he'd get the picture. Oh, them, he said. He looked around the bar. The bartender was wiping beer glasses at the other end. At the various tables sat a faintly transparent crowd of no-good-nick kikes and sinister Guidos, affectless, slitty-eyed thugs, invented by me out of noir film whole cloth. None of your fucking business, of course, said Shlomo, but no, they don't. There's no ghosts in my life at all. There might be ghosts in your life, and you choose to ignore them, or there might be no ghosts at all because ghosts don't exist. I ask only out of curiosity about how you live with being a serial murderer after the fact. What I'm asking is, are you haunted by conscience? You got away with it, sure, but you know you're somehow still guilty? Listen, he said. There's different ways to die. The long, slow, sad death from cancer or whatever, someone's beloved wife, their dear old mother, their brother-in-law who fixed the roof, their bowling buddy. That's the kind where you get ghosts. When there are people who want you to stick around, you linger after you croak because the living are keeping you alive. Trust me on this. A gun to the head, bullet goes in, shithead don't even know what hit him. That's different. I threw back my whiskey and said, "Oh, barkeep." The bartender ignored me. The word barkeep was not in his vocabulary, and like many a youth raised in these parts, he had learned that he was best off ignoring whatever he didn't understand, otherwise it might bite him. "Hey you," I barked, "another whiskey, please." "Make that 2, said Shlomo, and threw back his own shot. So anyway, the thing is, let's say we're sitting here, you and me, and that dumb fuck bartender comes over and shoots you in the head. Boom. First, there's no pain receptors in the brain. Dying that way don't hurt a bit, and since you don't even know what's coming, there's no fear or sadness or nothing. It's just over, kaput, just like that. Best way to go in the universe. I figure I was doing them a favor. Most of these guys were real low-life pieces of shit. You know what I'm saying? You were meant to kill me, as you may recall, I said, and I was many things, but I wasn't old enough yet to be a lowlife or a piece of shit. I was just a gigolo, as the song goes, trying to keep my head above water. He looked me over. Yeah, well, you were clearly a piece of shit to be. No, you weren't my usual clientele, it's true, but that was a favor to my cousin, and she and I went way back, and our parents went way back, and our grandparents before that, etc., back to Noah, most likely. Jesus, was she pissed off. Pissed! She wanted you blown to bits so bad she was smoking out of her ears. She was a very fat and strange woman, I said. She was altogether too attached to me. You were a fucking sponge. Poor Tova. She peed herself up on the beam at her bat mitzvah. 13 years old, and she wets herself. No one could tell, but afterwards she told me. That's how close we were. I felt like someone had to take care of her, and it had to be me, because she had no brothers, and our fathers were brothers who came through the camps together. It strikes me as somewhat interesting that Shlomo, whether discussing murder, his tragically unattractive and obese cousin, concentration camps, or his interest in another whiskey, uses the same nasal monotone, has the same flat expression, as if there were nothing whatsoever behind his words, as if in fact he had become his groceries, and his brain had turned into Swiss Miss pudding, his heart into a lump of some sort of dense, unappetizing luncheon meat, like olive loaf. He talks like a man who's merely biding time in his own psyche and physique until the time comes to vacate them. He wears himself very loosely, as if he didn't care one way or another when that time might be. We have a thing or two in common. Answer me this, I said suddenly, shifting gears to obliterate the image just forced upon me of my erstwhile keeper and mistress at 13, plump and terrified and pissing herself, which was causing my stomach to convulse. Would you say dying in the camps was worse than being bumped off by a hitman? What kind of question is that? He whined in his monotone. Surely you've thought about it. Dying in the camps, he shot back as if he'd just been waiting for his cue. Dying in the camps is worse, I would have to say, than getting bumped off as you walk freely down the street with your head in the clouds or sit stuffing your face at your uncle's restaurant. You jackass. You ignoramus dipshit goy. Dying in the camps means being in the camps. Know what I'm saying? That's the difference. I thought it wiser not to say anything. I waited for him to go on. And he did. Listen, I never thought killing was wrong per se. To me it depends. I'm raised Orthodox. I know what the Torah and Talmud say, yada yada, the commandment, thou shalt not. But some people are asking for it. Those scumbag shitwads, it's like mountain climbing, those putzes who go up Everest. You choose that way of life, odds are pretty good you're going to bite it at some point. And it's a living. I wouldn't say I got rich, but I was comfortable for a time. I just brought about the inevitable. I brought them to their natural end. That's a nice story to tell yourself at bedtime, I said. But according to your sources, killing a human being is wrong, no matter what end of argument, although you can flap on and on about varying degrees and shitwads and anything else you want all night. I'm not going anywhere that I know of, and I can hold a lot more whiskey than this. By the way, I happen to think the only person you're allowed to kill is yourself. Not according to the Talmud, said Shlomo with a faint gleam of relief that he wasn't the only reprobate here. I'm not Jewish, I pointed out without inflection. And although you could say that certain aspects of Jewish law would also apply to me insofar as I was a Christian, I'm not a Christian, so that's moot. I see nothing wrong with suicide, and I don't care about what anyone else thinks, even God. I don't believe in God, by which I mean I don't think about God. Everyone thinks about God, said Shlomo flatly. I don't, I said, and had a nice pull on my beer glass. You can't not think about God. God is like air or water or sleep or beer. Or maybe the point is not thinking about God as a negative action, like fasting, holding your breath, going on the wagon. You still got to have air and food and beer, even so. I'm not, I said, wiping my upper lip on the back of my hand, going to listen to a theology lecture from a hitman. I'm not a hitman anymore, he pointed out. And I was raised Orthodox, I believe I mentioned. 2 more whiskeys, barkeep, I trumpeted. Barkeep now recognized his appellation on its second repetition, nodded, sucked up some drool, and got busy. Let's just say for the sake of argument that I was planning, for reasons of my own, to kill myself, I said, and then you come along with your cockeyed idea about how it's better to whack someone than kill yourself. Not so cockeyed, he said. Taking your own life is a sin. Taking the life of a scumbag who's asking for it is just social hygiene. Right, you go ahead and keep telling yourself that. That's very comforting, I'm sure. Now here's my question. Would you then stop me from killing myself by whacking me with a bullet to the head? Why, said Shlomo, what the fuck do I care? Who are you to me? No one. Go ahead and rot in hell. I don't care. Unless, he added, with a crafty little crocodile expression, I was hired to whack you. Then everything would come into focus. That's a form of suicide, it seems to me. Not if you hire me by pretending to be someone else. Then I don't know what I'm doing. I just know I'm hired to whack a guy and some other guy is paying me. I rolled my eyes around to look at him without turning my head. I thought you weren't a hitman anymore. I'm not, he said, sitting up a little straighter. The end of scene 1. And now we meet Shlomo again in slightly different form in The Great Man, which is a novel about Oscar Feldman, a famous painter who's been dead for 5 years when the novel opens. And in this scene, his widow, Abigail, this is about the women in his life, his mistress, he was a real womanizer, and he kept a mistress for many years and slept with everyone else he wanted to, being a typical mid-20th century male painter, and his wife and his sister. And in the scene I'm about to read, his wife has a conversation with her dead husband's former best friend about why the friendship ended, something she's never known. The next morning before breakfast, Abigail got out the Manhattan White Pages, found a Treitler M on Green Street, and without stopping to consider whether or not she might be opening a can of worms, dialed the number. An hour later, her doorbell rang. "Abigail Feldman," said an ancient man in a slightly tattered black suit, a tattoo of a spider on his cheek. Shoulder-length, greasy gray hair sprouted from his skull-like head. "You look just the same." She stared at him while he grinned at her. He was missing a front tooth. "It's Morris," he said puckishly. "Mo Treitler." "Mo Treitler," she said. Mo Treitler had always been on the stout side, stout and pink and somehow juicy. "Esophageal cancer," he said. "That's why I look like this. I'm being eaten up from the inside. All those cigarettes finally bit me in the ass." "Mo," Abigail said, recognizing him now by his breathy voice and hepcat manner. "Come in, come in." He followed her back to the kitchen where Ethan sat at the breakfast nook. Ethan is her autistic son. Morris chucked him under the chin and slid in next to him. "Ethan," he said, "it's been a fucking lifetime, but you look just the same too." Mo Treitler had been Oscar's friend from childhood. They'd grown up together, had their bar mitzvahs the same year, chased girls together. Back before Oscar and Abigail were married, when they'd gone to jazz clubs in the village, they had double dated with Mo and a succession of his girls, most of whom Abigail had found intimidating, humorless, sophisticated, and slovenly. Then Oscar had married Abigail, and Mo had disappeared into Alphabet City to live in a tenement flat near Tompkins Square Park, where he'd cultivated through the years first a hipster heroin habit, then a full-blown addiction, and finally a rehabilitated, clean-living persona of righteous zeal. He painted street murals and enormous abstractions on stitched-together bedsheets and cheap fabric, played free jazz on his saxophone, mostly alone in the street for loose change, but also gigs with other musicians when he could get them. In the early years in the Riverside apartment, Mo had occasionally turned up for dinner with Oscar, both of them punchy and sweaty and hungry, often having walked the whole way uptown, shouting and arguing and gassing each other about what geniuses they both were. Mo always had some crazy outfit on, tie-dye jeans and animal fur vests in the 60s, top hats and glitzy ties and platform shoes in the 70s, velour jumpsuits and long silk scarves in the 80s, and then he disappeared from Oscar's life after a blow-up over something. Oscar wouldn't say what. Abigail hadn't liked Mo Treitler much when he was 16 and hadn't cared for him when he was 20 and 30 and 40, but she felt almost glad to see him now. "You want a cup of coffee or something?" "Coffee, great. Can I smoke in here?" "I'd rather you didn't," said Abigail, pouring some coffee for him, "but all right." Mo settled in, stretched his legs out under the table, lit a cigarette, and fondled his coffee cup. He had always been excessively tactile, needing to claim whatever came into his orbit by touching it, whether it was a woman, an object, or food and drink. Abigail dredged up the ashtray Maxine always used when she visited, a souvenir from Maui that had come from she knew not where, and set it on the table in front of him. "I can't believe Aki's gone," he said to Abigail, his eyes welling up. She remembered then his habit of tearing up easily, then pinching his nose as if staunching a potential cascade of tears. "Somehow sitting here makes it real in a way it wasn't before. Makes me feel so fucking old." "We are so fucking old," said Abigail. "I'm 80. How old are you?" "Yeah," said Morris. "I'm the same as Aki, so he would have been 83 now if he was still around." "Time flies, life." "Time flies, life," Abigail repeated. "It sure does. Last time I saw Aki, we almost killed each other. That was over 20 years ago, 1984. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Broke my heart, but I wanted to kill that guy. I wanted his neck between my two hands. We walked away like, it's over. A lifelong friendship. And it really was. I kept thinking, you know, I know, said Abigail. He told me you two fell out, but he wouldn't say what it was about. He also always sort of thought, you know, you'd patch it up. Well, we never did. Maxie I see from time to time. You know I live near her now. I see her out walking her dog late at night. Both of us are night owls. I call her Cranky Pants. She calls me the old nut job. Well, if it isn't Cranky Pants. Oh, no, not the old nut job. She sure has a stick up her ass. She sure can't pass judgment. We start arguing, drop of a hat. I say, Maxie, calm down. It's all one big pot of gold we're dipping our brushes in, whatever we do with the paint. I was spray painting a while back, heavily influenced by my very good friend Jean-Michel Basquiat. I told Maxie all about it, and she said, oh, that's just a bunch of bull. On the whole, she doesn't care for anything too street, you know, too unconventional, too black. Personally, I think black art and culture is all this country has going for it. It's the only original shit we've got. Morris clapped his hands together once and shook his head. That's the shit, man. That's where it's at. Black kids. I'm sure Maxie would have a lot to say about that, said Abigail. I myself have no opinion. Aki was just as nuts as his sister, Morris said. He looked over at Ethan with a paranoid grin, as if he might be a gossip columnist in disguise. Aki was a bad boy, worse than anyone but me you ever saw. We were the red devils on each other's shoulders, me and him, till we weren't anymore. There's a lot of stuff you would wet yourself if you knew, and most of that goes to the grave with me, or the stoppered jar, wherever I end up. I'll tell you one thing, though. He and I came up together sort of like brothers, brothers who fell out with each other, who ended up in hatred, but for a while there we were very close. Abigail watched him with an expression of careful, mild interest on her face, afraid if she revealed how rabidly she wanted to hear this, he would clam up and scuttle away. Listen to me, Morris went on, leaning in. No one knows this. I forgave Aki a long time ago, or maybe I never will, but this is my hour of sweet revenge. No one, repeated Abigail with frank disbelief. That's right, said Morris, and I know he never told anyone. It's not the kind of thing he would brag about, as you'll see. Not even Maxine? Nah, said Morris. Well, all right, Maxie probably knows most of this story. So my best friend, Morris's thin shoulders hunched in a shrug. As you well know, Aki didn't get along with a lot of guys. He was competitive, he liked women better, whatever. I put up with a lot of bullshit from him. One thing with Aki, he had to be the alpha male. He had to be top guy, big man on campus. Otherwise, he was out of his depth. He had to leave if another guy topped him. He didn't fight, he scrammed. With me, I let him be the famous guy who married a rich girl and lived in a nice house and had a tamale of a girlfriend on the side and all that. Abigail flinched. Sorry, sorry, said Morris, leaning in closer, as if he were sucking in her pain, altruistically siphoning it off like snake venom, but drinking it vampire-like at the same time. Anyway, meanwhile, I was the crazy poor one in the weird situations, doing drugs and living in cockroach shit. On top, that was him. On the edge, that was me. I never fought Aki on this. I let it ride. I wasn't competitive like that. I'm a live and let win kind of guy. Whatever. If that was his thing, let him have it. That's how I saw it. And that kept the friendship together through a lot of shit. A lot of shit. So then I got married. Oh, said Abigail. You ever meet Carol? I never met her, said Abigail. I don't think Oscar ever even mentioned her. No surprise, said Mo. This girl wasn't like the other girls I always had. This one was my own true love. Carol, her name was. She was so good to me. I would always go for these smarty pants Ivy League girls, younger, classy babes, slumming it with an old schmo like me from the Lower East Side who didn't know his ass from Thoreau. Then I meet Carol. She was younger, too, but from the same neighborhood. Not Jewish, but might as well have been. She spoke the same language as me. She knew who I was. And what was new for me was I was a step up for her. I looked pretty good after a bunch of low-life scumbags. I looked like a prince compared to those jerks, a real knight in white armor. But the thing is, she was beautiful, Carol. I mean, really a knockout. Long black hair, good-tempered, easy to be around. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I couldn't believe she loved me, too. Both of us had suffered from past heartbreaks. We'd been treated pretty rough, so we knew each other's weak spots, and we always took care to avoid causing more pain. We just plain loved each other. No drama, no bullshit. That sounds wonderful, said Abigail. It was, but Aki had a problem with her, he said. He was concerned when I told him we were tying the knot. He thought she was a bad influence on me. He thought she and I did too many drugs together. Drugs, schmugs. What did Aki know about that? What's wrong with it? What's wrong is you cease to be a good tax-paying member of society. But other than that, if you do it right, there's nothing bad about it. It doesn't hurt you or anyone else. There is no better feeling than that high. So me and Carol had a nice little using now and then, shacked up lifestyle going, and Aki didn't like it one bit. I'd already been through rehab, and Aki had seen me through the whole fucking thing and paid for it too. So you know, to be fair, I can see why it might have bugged him. But this time around, I was smart about it. I didn't let it get out of control because I loved this girl too much, and I was looking out for her as well. Abigail made a skeptical noise that had been intended to sound non-committally encouraging. So we get married, get on with it. She's a writer, I'm a painter and musician. We do our things. She does poetry readings, I play the odd gig. We sell stuff on First Avenue in St. Mark's to make ends meet. Stuff we find rooting through other people's garbage, but perfectly good shit, you know. On a good night, we could clear plenty to score and get a little taco and go out the next day, do it again. There I was, living the sub-American dream. Perfect wife, little tenement flat with the bathtub in the kitchen, the free and easy life. So back to Aki, the wrench in the works. Oh dear, said Abigail. I don't know if it was seeing me happy finally, or if it was because Carol didn't give Aki the time of day. In her eyes, I was the great artist. She always told me, you have more originality in your little finger, yada yada, built me up like that. She'd go, don't let him act like that, treat you that way. His stuff is cornball, it's over. She thought he was a big phony. He thought she was bad news. So there was no love lost. Yes, said Abigail, I'm gathering that. Well, it's important then you do, because what happens next is so shocking. Afterwards, Carol and I went our separate ways. At first, though, I just knew, I felt it in my bone marrow that we'd be together till the end. And then it all exploded in my face. Abigail looked right at Morris. Well, I can see it coming like a regular commuter train, she said. He looked at her and shook his head without surprise. I bet you can, he said, but I didn't. And I never got over it. To this day, I am still not over it. He paused dramatically. So, said Abigail, twitching a little with impatience to hear the worst. Maybe it was seeing me happy, said Morris. Maybe it was that he could tell she didn't think much of him. I don't know, but for whatever reason, Aki had to break us up, and he knew the only way to do it. And I mean the only way. Carol could have killed my mother, fucked everyone in Rikers, eaten a pound of human feces every morning for breakfast. I would have kept her with me through nuclear fallout. But Aki, I truly don't know how he did it. I can't imagine how he got around her. I can, said Abigail. They exchanged a look. I bet you can, said Morris, with far more pity than anger. Oscar slept with your wife, Abigail said, as if this affirmatively answered a question she'd asked herself for many years. He's a real charmer, this guy. And he comes back again. The Astral is about a 57-year-old poet named Harry Quirk, who has been kicked out of the Astral apartments in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. I lived in Williamsburg and Greenpoint for 20 years, and it's a very powerful neighborhood. And for a long time, I would walk by the Astral apartments and just wonder about it. It's a really interesting building. I don't know if any of you know it. It's a big red, mammoth, massive, castle-like, yet kind of skeevy pile. And there are all sorts of rumors floating around Greenpoint about it, all of which I put in my novel. I've never set foot in the building. I thought it was important not to, for some reason, as I wrote about it. Harry's been kicked out of there by his wife of 30 years, Luce, because she thinks he's having an affair with Marion, his best friend of 35 years. He is, in fact, not having an affair with Marion, but Luce won't believe him. And the whole neighborhood has heard about it and has taken sides. And in this scene, Harry has just applied for a job in a lumber yard, and then he goes for a drink to cheer himself up. I threaded the streets up to Barry and then went back under the bridge to the Mullet, the bar nearest Marion's house, which I knew would be open even at this hour. The Mullet's motto, emblazoned on a shingle under the bar name, was "Business in the front, party in the back." And the decor was some urban northerner's idea of vintage, authentic trailer trash. Hubcaps, beer signs, laminated paneling, linoleum in the front room, shag rug in the back. The bar top was Formica, the curtains were polyester zebra print. I sat at the bar and ordered a moonshine fizz, which came in a miniature tin bucket and tasted cheerful and deadly in about equal parts, which was exactly what I needed at the moment. I began to work my way through it, inspired by the barmaid's shirt, which ended at her sternum to show off her bare midriff, and was sleeveless to show off her muscled biceps, as well as tight to show off her cute breasts. I also loved her jailbait braids tied with twine. I would have sweet-talked her, but that would have accomplished nothing but getting myself thrown out of there, since girls like that invariably turned out to be lesbians with chips on their shoulders. Occasionally, I liked the daytime drinking of hard liquor. It made the daylight seem artificial and the air extra oxygenated and gave me an adrenaline rush, like being in a casino. I'd better drink some water. Just hold on. This will help. It's the pollen. Okay, where was I? I was about halfway through my drink when I heard a voice above and behind me saying, "Well, if it isn't Harry Quirk." I turned to behold my old acquaintance, Dan Levy, a small, wiry fellow in a down coat and jeans. Dan lived around the corner from here. No doubt he had come to the mullet for the same reasons I had: proximity to home, a desire to blur the edges, and, not least of all, the girl behind the bar. I thumped the bar stool next to my own. Dan sat, ordered what I was having, and when it arrived, we hit our miniature buckets together. He took a big swallow and said, without preamble and not without sympathy, "I hear you've been having some personal troubles." "My God," I said, "quite a grapevine in this small town. Aren't we too old to care what we all do anymore?" He had the grace to look chagrined. "I guess we are," he said. He looked into his glass. "What's in this drink, anyway?" "Tastes like bourbon and lemon soda," I said, "and a little extra something. Sweat, maybe." He tasted his drink again. "I hope it's hers," he said with a flick of his head. The bartender pretended not to hear him. So did I. It made me uneasy to see Dan Levy still playing the coxswain. Marion had always thought he was a blowhard, a troll, but as far as I could tell, this view had not been shared by most other women. Dan had left many parties over the years with many lovely lasses. Eventually, he married a girl, or rather a woman, named something like Terry or Tina, one of the loveliest of the lasses, and they had kids. And the decades went by, and now he looked as hangdog and restless as anyone else. This disappointed me for some reason. We'd been tacitly rivalrous once, Dan and I, back when we were young and it all mattered. Dan was a language poet. His work was cerebral and experimental, and to my taste, cold. In the olden days, he had frequented poetry slams and sported an ostentatious Jew-fro and affected a kind of literary street diction that went straight up my spine. Sometimes he read his work accompanied by a black free jazz sax player. Meanwhile, I was, in Dan's estimation anyway, a throwback, a nonentity, a non-contender, writing my defunct lyrical, visceral, rhymed verse in my corduroy trousers and Irish sweaters. But now here we were, two hoary practitioners of a skill as useless as bloodletting or butter churning, sitting side by side on a cold, late winter noon in a hipster bar. "It's true," I said, "what the hell. I'm having some personal troubles." "Right," he said. "It's never fun." The silence that ensued was difficult for me. I wanted to defend myself, but my pride prevented it. I owed no explanation to Dan or anyone, but I wasn't cheating on my wife. He hadn't said so outright, but he'd obviously heard I was. Anyway, somehow I had thought, through my long years of neighborliness and fellowship with everyone around here, that I would have a pass, a benefit of the doubt card, while Luz and I sorted all this out. But it hadn't, I could tell from Dan's expression, which was half sympathetic, half rapacious, predatory zoo animal. Of course, no restraint or loyalty kicked in when something scandalous was being thrown around. Gossip was a drug no one could turn down, raw, bloody meat to caged cheetahs. My suspicion that everyone would believe the worst without question had just been confirmed. "Funny day," I said after several pulses of silence went by. "I was just remembering old times walking through the streets." "Which ones? Which streets?" "Times. The ones when we were young and no one cared what we did." "So we thought." He said it scornfully. "No one cared," I said, trying not to bristle. "I guess you have reason to be nostalgic these days." He did not say it with any particular judgment, but still I quelled a volcanic eruption of anger in my stomach. 2 weeks ago, I might have told him to go fuck himself up the ass. Now that I was marked as a pariah of sorts, I needed the fellowship. "Yes," I said, "I guess I do." "So," he said, scooching closer to me, breathing on my face, "what's it like to be with Marion Delahunt? I always thought she was hot, as a matter of fact, and I never got a taste of that, but I bet her shit is correct." His drink was already almost half gone. "You're such a fucking tool," I said before I could stop myself. He put both hands up. "Just asking, man." I shook my head. "I'm not sleeping with her." "Sure, sure." I stared at him hard, unsmiling, trying in some cockamamie way to defend Marion's honor. "Hey, I believe you." He leaned in even closer. I could smell his musky skin. "But if you were," he said with silky intimacy, "then good on you." I harumphed on a burst of exhaled air. "You fuckhead, you know Marion wouldn't touch either of us with a cattle prod." "Yeah, that's an image. Marion Delahunt with a cattle prod. Now I'm getting turned on." He laughed at his own incorrigible horn-doggedness, and then I laughed too, and then we both backed down. "You asshole," I said, still laughing. "Hey, someone's got to be the asshole around here. How's Tina? How are your kids?" They're all here somewhere, I think. Well, the kids are in college now, but Tina stuck around, I'm pretty sure. So what were you thinking about the old days? How much fun they were. They probably weren't really. But in retrospect, it does seem that we enjoyed ourselves a lot. You? You had a stick up your ass even then. I fucking cannot believe you never tapped Marion. Seriously, man. Jesus fucking Christ, you spent every minute together. And then you married someone else. Not that she's not a tremendous person, Luz. She's a lovely person. But now Marion, that is a girl. I used to dream about that girl back when I had dreams. She's my friend, I said. Here was my chance to defend myself, but I wasn't relishing it as much as I thought I would. Like brother and sister, I've never touched her. It's not like that. Dan leaned his head on one hand and rested it there and gazed at me with melancholy skepticism. His face had not aged much through the years, but his skin had darkened with time, his schnoz had become wider and flatter, so now he almost looked like the hip black dude he'd once aspired to be. His hairline had receded far back on his skull. His longish, once black hair was now mostly silver. The effect was wizardy and comical. He looked like a swarthy elf. Yeah, the old days, he said. We were no happier then. Are you sure? Think about it. I'm sure I was, I said. Look at me. You really aren't fucking Marion, and your wife threw you out anyway. That's right. Harsh, he said. That's unfortunate, Harry. I'm sorry. At the very least, you could actually be, you know, getting some. I appreciate your delicacy and tact, I said. He sat up straight and put one didactic finger in the air. Chicanery, tomfoolery, skullduggery, he said with suggestive challenge, and then waited for me to take my turn. Quackery, I said after a moment of consideration. I wasn't in the mood for this old game, and anyway I was out of practice. Treachery, humbuggery. Hey now, he said. He drank from his little bucket. Roguery, robbery, forgery. I drank from mine. Buggery, which is different from humbuggery and therefore counts. Pettifoggery, brigandry. He slapped the bar and knit his bristly silver-black brows together. Perjury, usury, savagery. How's your work going, really? I said. Fuck you, he said. I thought so. How's yours? Lingerie, I said with tipsy vehemence, and he laughed. I'm going to let that one slide. Hackery, Jim-crackery, jiggery-pokery, rookery, cuckoldry, diablery, harlotry, flim-flammery. We toasted each other with our silly drinks and together studied the pulchritudinous bartendress with thoughtful attention. Buffoonery, japery, she said, coming toward us to inspect our drinks. Ready for more, gentlemen? Japery, said Dan. Good one. She rolled her eyes, but not in an unfriendly way. No more for me, I said. My budget won't allow it. It's on the house, she said, busying herself with ice, bourbon, and mixers. Slow day. I'd rather have company than stand here alone. The regular crowd doesn't show up till late afternoon. I'm Lexi, by the way. I'm Harry, I said, and this is Dan. We're the early bird special crowd. He means we're too old to be in here, said Dan. Pish-tosh, she said, setting fresh moonshine fizzes in front of us. Poppycock, balderdash. Neither Dan nor I had a comeback. We stared at her with slack-jawed interest. The poets crap out, I said. We're a dying breed, said Dan. Oh, don't be such a drama queen, I said. Lexi tapped the bar with her fingernail. The obvious one is moonshine, she said. Anyway, what the fuck? I know a lot of poets, and they're like half your age. Claptrap, malarkey, flummery, said Dan. That's the spirit, said Lexi, whose name had now revealed itself to be comically apt and possibly made up. Rot, I said. Tripe, twaddle. Is that your real name? Short for lexicographer, she said. Her face was so pretty it confounded the eyes. Creamy-skinned, brown-eyed, aquiline-nosed, luscious-lipped. Her bare upper arms glistened with dewy, muscular, supple youth. Her neck was a pearly stalk made of lily petals. My last name is Verbiage. Wow, said Dan, in that calculatedly hipstery, testosterone-infused breathiness that women had once found incomprehensibly seductive. Your parents must be out of their minds. Or I must, she said. No, I'm kidding. It's short for Alexis. Last name's Levy. Get the fuck out, Levy. Mine is too, said Dan. Get the fuck out, Levy, she said, laughing. I guess we're distant cousins. I hope not, said Dan. She laughed again. When she laughed, her mouth gleamed, her teeth shone. She was perfect, like a sex android. She was a wet dream wish fulfillment. Years of conditioning by the prevailing social winds, not to mention my wife and daughter, almost forced me to back away from my carnivorous attitude toward this intelligent, autonomous young woman, but I was drunk and attracted enough to let it prevail. You're a poet, Lexi Levy? Dan asked in his nasal hip-hop coo. No, she said, I'm a playwright. But I really am friends with a lot of poets. They're everywhere. It's not a dying art, not at all. Where do the kids read these days? The kids, as you call them, read all over the place. There's a bar on Grand Street. There's another one on North 6th, all over the place. So Dan Levy, she squinted at him. Should I know your name? Not unless you read obscure old zines and chapbooks, he said. Harry here, you might have heard of him. He has a legitimate publisher. Had, I said. She moved to London. What's your last name, Harry? Quirk, I said, as in eyebrow, as in idiosyncrasy. Harry Quirk, she said. Her lit-up, excited expression was quite possibly the best thing that had ever happened to me in my entire life, besides the birth of my kids and maybe my wedding day, but maybe not. I can't believe it! Harry Quirk! One of my friends, worships you. She owns all your books. She thinks you're like an unsung genius. Oh my God, I can't believe this. I have to text her. Hold on. She got out her cell phone and began punching buttons on it. I watched her with apprehensive disbelief. The day had reached its zenith, its apogee, along with the sun. From here, it would be all downhill. The friend would show up. I would invariably have another moonshine fizz, and, in my state of flattered excitement, behave like the knucklehead I was, and thereby greatly disappoint my alleged fan, who was no doubt Lexi Levy's equal in wit and beauty, and then I would wind up feeling queasily, stupidly, pointlessly drunk. I slipped from my bar stool and waved goodbye to the Levys, who watched me go with some consternation and surprise. Back in the cold, bright day, I made my way to Marion's empty house, where I lay in lordly, supine bliss, like an emperor on the couch, and surfed a fresh wave of hope and joy into a long, restorative nap. Thank you. I use them sparingly, and they are useful. You're absolutely right. And you're absolutely also right, and I was nodding while you were saying that the trick with a flashback is to create a sense of expectation or curiosity about it before you deploy it, so that there's sort of a place in the book. You make a place in the book for the flashback. And I think often that's not done. I think there are gratuitous scenes that the author just wants you to know about his or her character, and maybe I've done this too, where you just kind of stick it in and hope it flies, hope you care enough about the character to read it. But why I don't like them is that I feel that there's a forward momentum in a book that has to be maintained by the writer, and anything that sort of stalls it or moves it, to the side or sort of keeps it going. A book is like an arrow, you shoot it out at the beginning and it should just fly the entire way through the novel. And it can slow down and it can, wobble a little bit, but it really should be flying toward the end of the novel straight and true. And I feel that flashbacks are often, they sandbag it. They sort of make it stop in midair and sort of hover there while you have to look elsewhere over here. And I think the trick with a flashback is to make it really exciting and make it part of the narrative and make it part of the forward momentum, so that even though you're going back in time, you're moving it forward because you're supplying information about the characters that there's no other way to do. And when I was writing the Astral, I finished the first draft with no flashbacks in it, and I gave it to my editor. And he said that this, he liked it fine, but his main question was, what about the past? You need flashbacks. And so he forced me to put in about 8. So I have them in here, but I tried to make it work without them. That's how little I like to use them. But clearly, I needed them. But as I was writing them, I felt too that I tried to find the ones that really were necessary for the story. And not just for my own sort of, delight in my characters, whom I love. And, of course, I want to reveal everything I know about them. But that has to be done judiciously, because I know that I need to convince the reader that they're worthy of the love that I have for them. And I can't indulge myself as much as I would like to. I'm so happy you asked that. That's very flattering. In The Great Man, the plot turns toward the past. And there are some pictures, apparently, that Oscar Feldman has done that are in the library at Brooklyn College. And one of the biographers, it's about 2 biographers who are writing the story of Oscar's life, sort of competing with each other, hustles out there to look at them because the other biographer doesn't know about them. In fact, I made them up, and I made Oscar up, and they don't exist. And I based Oscar on a lot of real artists. He's sort of a composite, like a pastiche of all kinds of bad boy artists in the mid-20th century who got away with everything and had a great time and had great lives. And but thank you for asking. That means it sort of worked, that it created the illusion that Oscar actually existed. No one's ever asked me that before. I'm glad you did. The question is about a character in The Great Man, Ethan, the autistic son, who's sitting in the breakfast seat when Mo arrives. And she asked why I created an autistic character and gave him a voice. Because this is an autistic person who's very shut in and he can't communicate, but his mother is Abigail, feels that she understands him. I have an autistic cousin, and I love him dearly. And he knit me a hat that has a big hole in it, so it doesn't really keep my head warm, but I treasure it. And we used to spend summers together, and I always tried to communicate with him and talk to him, and I felt like I had heard that autistic people can understand what you're saying, even if they can't respond to it. And I wanted to establish a relationship with him. We were the same age, and I felt like he's my cousin. You know, I want to know him or something. And I never really felt that I had, but I liked to think in creating Ethan that it was sort of in Roland's sort of to commemorate him, or to give a character a lot of those qualities, and to create that kind of relationship with a family member and an autistic person, an autistic adult in this case, that I had with my cousin. And because the mystery is so profound, and you do sort of project a lot, and who knows if it's right or wrong, but it's a novel about talking and how identity is formed and very mutable and shifting, but it's formed by words. And it's really people creating Oscar through words through the whole book. This guy who's dead and gone and doesn't exist anymore, and then 2 biographies come out, again creating him in language. And the fact that they're at the heart of the book is his son, his only son, and this is the painter whose life is being verbally created by me, obviously writing the book, but also by everyone in the book. His one and only son is unable to speak. So I think I never sort of think about what characters signify or stand for until I've written the book. So as I was writing it, I really felt like it was the right son for Oscar to have. This guy who was so outward and so boisterous and so selfish, and so, he was an id. He was a walking ego and id. And to have this son who was a shut-in and couldn't talk and was very beautiful and sort of emotional and reactive, to things, but couldn't express and didn't, therefore, that's sort of Oscar's. He has 2 daughters by his mistress too, and that's a whole other story. But to me, I guess it does, I don't know if metaphorical is the word, but it feels apt. And it feels like there's a place for that in the book, given that the book is about language and how identity is shaped by it. It's about the great man and how it's full of vital, sexy older women. And she asked, did I have a particular reason for wanting to make the book about them? It's really, they're the stars of the book. Oh yeah, no, I did. First of all, there's a real lack in fiction of women who are, say, over 65, who are sexual and who have starring roles in novels, and who have just sort of a central presence in a novel, and who inhabit the novel the way in some novels the ingenue does, or the woman in search of herself, or there are all kinds of female characters. But this again was very instinctive, and I didn't set out to sort of do this, but I realized as I was writing the book that I really loved the fact that these women were older. And while I was writing the book, my mother in her late 60s had a passionate love affair, like absolutely just knocked her socks off. And it was a guy she'd known years before, and they were both finally single at the same time. And he invited her sailing on his boat in Baja California, and he had a sailboat. And I went with her to buy a bathing suit, and she was all, oh, I'm so excited. And then she came back just glowing like she was 14. And that just kind of, first of all, was great for my mother. And second of all, I felt inspired by that. I mean, because I'm always looking for things to write about, and everyone is a potential character in a novel. And I wrote the book for my mother, and I wrote the book because I felt like well, first of all, this is the kind of book I knew she'd like to read, and she did. But second, I felt like she and her friends, I didn't see them in a lot of books. Like, I didn't see women like that who had that kind of vigor and appetite and just frank, you know, presence. And often older women in novels are like the aunt or the annoying neighbor or sort of the doddering, needy mother, or, you know, they're problems in some way, or they're off to the side, or and it just felt really good. I felt like I know women like this. These are the women I know. These are my mother and her friends, and they are like this. And I don't know. I'm sure there are many, many more in the world, and I don't know why they're not in more books. So yes. The question was, is The Great Man about strong-willed women who did what they had to do to survive? Yeah, I think that sums it up really well. No, I think it is. I mean, you could see them all in one way or another as victims, but they don't feel like victims. I mean, Abigail knew that her husband had a mistress and he slept around, but she's very dignified. And I mean, in the scene with Mo Treitler where he just tells her the worst thing Oscar did, she knew, and she loved him anyway. The scene goes on, and, you know, she has this moment of saying, you know, he says, what kind of love was that? And she says, a love where I knew him, I understood him. And I mean, that sort of gets at who Abigail is. And then his sister Maxine, who was never as famous as he was, but who kind of takes a perverse pride in keeping a secret that could have made her career. And the secret comes out in the course of the novel and indeed makes her career, but she's not the one who told. And then the mistress Teddy, she inherited nothing from him. Her daughters are illegitimate, but she's very proud. I mean, I feel like all of them have their eyes wide open. They're not victims in any way. They're all sort of accepting and feisty. They don't want to be pitied. They don't want, you know, they're proud of who they are. And that's another thing I loved about them too. If you're allowed to love your characters. Thank you so much for your questions. Thanks for coming. I really am moving back to Brooklyn.